I'm certain you've been in one of these conversations before where somebody's going to go visit a town that you've visited, or somebody's going to go eat in a restaurant where you've eaten, or read a book that you've read, or they're going to go see a movie that you've seen, or they're going to take a trip that you've taken on a cruise ship, but they haven't done it yet, and they know you have, and so they ask you some questions about it. And invariably, the way you'll find yourself answering is, yes, I read that book. What books have you read? And you'll go through the books that they've read, and you say, yeah, it's kind of like that one, but it's not the same. Or you'll talk about a cruise that you were on, and you'll say, have you ever been on a cruise before? And say, no. Well, you'll say, well, it's kind of like this other type of vacation you could take, which is a little different. It's on water instead of on a vehicle. Or they're going to go visit a town. In fact, I just had this conversation with a friend this week where he had just been on a trip in Europe and had found this little tiny town in Germany and told me that it was a lot like Madison, except everybody spoke German there. So he was trying to convey to me what those places were like. But he had to use the experience that I already had to help me understand maybe what was going on there. He had to draw from my own experience to figure out a way that I might start to imagine in my mind what that place or that book or that movie or that mode of travel was like. Can't just tell me what it was like for them. They have to find something to connect with in me. Well, the writer to the letter of Hebrews, that is exactly what this book is. The letter to the Hebrews is a letter from a person. He's writing to some folks that he knows what their life experiences are, and he is trying to relate to them what Jesus is like based on what they already know. So he starts this book by saying that Jesus is like angels, but he's not really an angel. But there's something about angels that Jesus might be like. And once he's finished that, he goes, I know you know about Moses too. And he said, Jesus is kind of like Moses, but he's not Moses. And when we get to this point in the letter, he says Jesus is like a priest. Actually, this idea of Jesus being a priest is only found in this letter to the Hebrews. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. It's only here. And the reason it's only here is because the priest that they would have known, Jesus is like them. But Jesus isn't the priest like they have experience with. But there's something about their priesthood that's similar. And after he wraps up talking that Jesus is like a priest, but different, he's going to say how Jesus is like a sacrifice, but different as well. And there is a method to all this madness as well. So when he gets to this point where he's saying Jesus is like a priest, we have to know what kind of priest that Jesus is like so that we know what the argument is being made. And then we can see how Jesus is eventually different. Now, to do this, I do need to make a caveat here, which is the word here for priest in the book of Hebrews, or the word for priest actually everywhere in the Bible, and it might come as a shock to you, has zero to do with what I was ordained to be. In fact, the words in the Bible that we ordain people to, whether it's in this church or in the church 4 blocks down the street or in the church kitty corner over here or the one straight behind us, we ordain them all to this same office, this office of presbyter, which has zero to do with the word used for priest here. And it's a very complicated history why some churches call these people priests and some don't. And I will spare you that complicated history today because I don't know. It's fascinating to me, but I could see how it might not be as fascinating to you. But I do want I want to point that out because even for us, if somebody came and said Jesus was like a priest, and you started imagining me or Father Carson or Father Meyer or Father Sims or other priests that you've had in your life experience, that's not what they're talking about. Because technically we all are this other thing. We're these things, these presbyters is the actual word, and it is actually more relates to our role as shepherds or pastors or administrators or teachers. The priesthood that Jesus is like in this letter is not that one. I'm not saying Jesus isn't like those things. In fact, Jesus often is called a shepherd by more people in the New Testament than he's called a priest by. This office of priest that Jesus is like isn't just that self-righteous, long preaching person that you've had experience with in the past. Jesus has a special kind of priesthood. And to make sure that his audience understands this, the writer of Hebrews tells us exactly what that priesthood means. And he tells us two things about it. One is the role of the priest that Jesus is like is to intercede on the behalf of people who need to come to God. That priest is there so that when people want to have a facilitated conversation with God, they're able to do so through that priestly office. And in fact, he names two priests, and we'll talk about one of them at more length in just a moment, Aaron and this other fellow, Melchizedek. And then he said there's a second thing about this, and that is a priest don't happen accidentally. They are appointed for the role that they have. So when he's talking about Jesus being a priest, he then goes in to say how Jesus did this. That Jesus spent time in prayer. Jesus spent time in tears, interceding on behalf of the people that he was like. But also he had a special role to play in the kingdom that he was appointed to do. So if you want to know what Jesus is like in the priest, it's these two things. Jesus is like the priest that intercedes, who prays, who holds up, who provides holy space for people to come and meet God. And a priest is a person that does so knowing that this is the job that they were supposed to do. Now, this passage gets more complicated by the fact that you might have heard of Aaron before because he's Moses' brother. In fact, it's very interesting to me, and also I won't spare you the details on this, that he just got talking about how Jesus is like Moses, but is not Moses. And now he's going to talk about how Jesus is like Moses' brother Aaron, but it's not really Aaron too. But he also brings up that there's this other folkloric hero that they would know about, this fellow named Melchizedek, that Jesus is like, that his priesthood is like that. It would be as though if you were talking about some president you liked and you would say, they're a president in the style of George Washington, or they're a president in the style of Abraham Lincoln. He's saying Jesus is a priest in the style of Aaron, but especially of this hero of old in ancient times, Melchizedek. And the heroes, the hearers of this story would have known what Jesus was talking about here. Remember, this writer is trying to say, if you want to know what Jesus is like, you have to remember what so-and-so was like in the past. I know you never met Jesus, but I'm trying to describe Jesus to you by things that you already know. And when they heard this name Melchizedek, they would have remembered the only story we know about him. And that is a story that happens where Abraham has gone out to a battle. In fact, Abraham really, in our picture of the Old Testament, is this traveling nomadic king, and he actually has quite an army with him, because you just don't move throughout the ancient world by your lonesome without being robbed and killed all the time. So he is a very powerful person. And Abraham is doing what it seems like is the only thing Abraham can do, which is Abraham loses his family members and then has to go retrieve them. In fact, 4 of the stories about Abraham, which is 3/4 of them, are about Abraham losing a family member and having to regain them. Now, twice of those 4 stories, it's his wife, and he actually got rid of her on purpose and has to go get her back. In this story, his nephew, Lot, who is his heir, has been captured by a warring king. And so Abraham finds out that Lot has been carried off and kidnapped and his whole family by this warring king. So Abraham musters his forces. He goes out. He wipes them out. And in true army fashion, he takes all the spoils of the battle with him. And as he's coming back to where his home base is, this mysterious figure Melchizedek shows up. Because Melchizedek knows that Abraham needs to have an intercession with God right now, and that's exactly what happens. Melchizedek shows up. He provides a holy space through sacrifice and through meal. And Abraham, in turn, it facilitates this kind of holy space by making an offering to Melchizedek. God put Melchizedek there in the appointed perfect time to intercede for Abraham, who had been in battle. And so people hearing this letter would have thought, that's what Jesus does too. Jesus shows up when we don't expect it to facilitate an offering of our own selves to God, because God knows that we need it and puts him there at the right time. When we talk about the priesthood of Jesus, we're talking about a person who is there for us at the times we most need it, because God intended for it to be that way, not because it was accidental. Now, I've told you there's a whole method to this letter's madness, and the method is this. It is only firstly to tell you what Jesus is like based on something that you already know. The second point is to tell you what you can be like because you know Jesus. He doesn't just tell us that Jesus is better than angels just so we don't worship angels. He doesn't just tell us that Jesus is like Moses but better so that we don't worship Moses, or he's like a priest but he doesn't do that just to talk about what Jesus is. He sets forth this picture of Jesus so that we can begin to be like it. And it's no secret, because he eventually tells all of the readers of this letter, the reason Jesus came is so that you all can be priests too. In fact, this is where we get this idea that we are a kingdom full of priests. That's the other reason I tell you this word here has nothing to do with what I was ordained to do, because in this word of priesthood, there is not one single way I am different from any other person of faith in the world. We have all been called to the same kind of priesthood of Jesus. We are, by nature of being part of this community, all priests ourselves in the way that Melchizedek was, and Aaron was, and Jesus is. And that is, it is no accident that we have all been made priests. We've all been made priests so that we could go and encounter people and make holy spaces for them wherever they might be. Whether, like Melchizedek, they meet somebody on the road back from battle, or like maybe someone had this week where you met somebody who was going through a trial in a coffee shop, or maybe somebody who came into your office, or maybe somebody who called you on the phone. Maybe somebody you've never seen before and you encountered in the Quick Trip convenience store. The reason the letter of the Hebrews wants to tell you that Jesus is a priest and what that priesthood is like is because you are one too. If you want to know what your job is in the kingdom, it's to intercede, and it's to make holy space. And nobody in here, not myself, not Carson if he was here, not Monsignor Shekel down the street, not Tom Dowling over there, not Bill Bush behind me, has anything over God's intention for you to be that. I don't intercede more than you do. We are all a kingdom of priests together, and we've all been given the job of interceding. And more importantly to the fact, it is no accident. Amen.